Let's get on now to the final main topic of the day before we get over to the live questions. And our final main topic of the day comes us from Joseph J. Dennis, who writes, Titanic held the #1 spot for 15 weeks at the box office in 1998 till it got beat up by Lost in Space. How long do you suspect Endgame to hold the spot? Could it possibly hold the mark until Far From Home? I'm not even sure when Toy Story drops. Guys, we've got this little movie opening up tonight called Avengers Endgame. I'm going to go out on a limb. And some of you might think I'm crazy, but I believe the numbers and the facts back me up. You can say I'm crazy all you want, but I'm going to tell you right now, Avengers Endgame is going to be the #1 movie at the box office this weekend. I know that's a bold prediction. I know some of you won't agree, but that's fine. I'm going to go out there and say it's going to be #1. So the question becomes, how long? You know, you're talking about some films like 15-week stretch, all that kind of stuff. You know, we just had Captain Marvel did hold for 3 or 4 weeks long. How long will Avengers Endgame hold that #1 spot? Rob, let's put you on the hot seat first. How long do you think we're going to see Endgame hold that #1 spot?
We're going into May, man, and there's a lot of big movies opening. I think Avengers Endgame, as good as it is, and as many times I think people are going to go back and see it, I think even getting past 5 weeks at #1 is a stretch. We're going into a big summer movie season. There's a lot of, we're just talking about Godzilla. That opens, May 31st? I don't think movies like John Wick 3 are going to challenge Endgame, of course. And I haven't looked, I don't have the actual release schedule in front of me, but, I'd give it 5 weeks tops. It is a 3-hour movie. It's going to be very front-loaded in terms of how much money it makes. But then again, I do believe the movie is so satisfying that people are going to keep going back and seeing it. And then the people that don't see it are going to watch Infinity War because they want to know what all the hype's about, and they don't want to FOMO. They want to be part of it all, and they're going to go see it. So I think it's going to have a very strong box office through May, but I can't see it lasting 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
Greg, what do you think? How long does Endgame hold that #1 spot?
Dennis Quaid's The Intruder will knock it out next week for sure.
Always trust Dennis Quaid.
Yeah, you never underestimate that guy. First off, I think to compare it to like the Titanic run is very different because Titanic came out like a week before Christmas, and in that so you're not really leading into any competition. 1998 or 97 box office was very, very different back then in terms of what they had coming out. And like Rob said, there's so many big movies coming out. For sure, next week it'll keep #1. To me, it's more of a question mark if Detective Pikachu has a chance of beating it out, because a lot of times when it comes to box office predictions for me, I actually factor in how the trailers on YouTube perform, because the first trailer for Detective Pikachu was at 60 million views, and then the last one was at like 25 million. So it shows like a drop off in interest. But then, you also got Aladdin coming out, and then you have Godzilla a week after Aladdin. So for me, it's like it's either going to be #1 for 3 weekends or 5 weekends, because there's a gap there. If it beats out Detective Pikachu, then it's going to be #1 for 5 weekends. But I can't see it going more than 5 weeks at most, because you're going up against Aladdin and Godzilla later on. I think it'll be in the top 5. I think if it wants to compare it to Titanic, I think it could be in the top 5 for perhaps like 10 to 15 weeks, though.
Look how long that Captain Marvel. Marvel dropped out of the top 5 and just jumped back up into the top 5. Now I'm sure Endgame's going to knock it out of the top 5. I'll tell you what. I believe Endgame is going to be the #1 film at the box office for only 2 weekends.
Yeah, that's my.
I believe only 2 weekends, and here's why. This is a little thing I call infinity math. All right, here's some infinity math, guys. Let's go and look at Infinity War, okay? We go back last year to Infinity War. Infinity War opened to $257 million. Now remember, the more people that go opening weekend, the more likely you're going to have a plus 50%, maybe even a 60% drop, because everybody's already gone to see it. So that kind of plays into it. Infinity War had a 55% second weekend drop-off and had a 45% drop-off from week 2 to week 3. All right. Let's take that math. Now, a lot of people are saying that we're going to see Endgame open anywhere between 260, which is the low end, which already beats the opening weekend box office record, by the way, anyway between 260 and 300 million. So let's split the difference there in the middle. Let's say Avengers Endgame opens to $280 million, which would destroy the opening weekend box office, just destroy it. If it follows the pattern of a 55% drop, and by the way, I think it's going to take larger than a 55% drop going into week 2 because so many people, like you said, Rob, it's so front-ended. But let's say it follows the same pattern. 55% drop on going into its second weekend. That means it's going to make $154 million on its second weekend, okay? Now, if it continues to follow suit and only takes a 45% drop from weekend 2 to weekend 3, that means it's going to come in at around 69.3. Now, all these numbers are give and take a little bit, but just for a general idea. So you're looking at a third weekend for Avengers Endgame, if it holds up that well, of making around $69 million in its third weekend. Well, what opens in its third weekend? Detective Pikachu. Mm-hmm. This means that Detective Pikachu would only, as if $70 million is some tiny number, but that Detective Pikachu would need to make $70 million opening weekend to take the number 1 spot. With all the positive reviews for Detective Pikachu now flooding out, with all the word of mouth, with the quality of the trailers, there are speculations right now that Detective Pikachu could open anywhere between $60 and $85 million. I believe that the math is pointing us towards Detective Pikachu taking the number 1 spot that weekend with $70+ million and Endgame coming in slightly south of that. Therefore, I believe Endgame is only going to be number 1 for 2 weeks in a row. However, if it does, let's say Pikachu underperforms a little bit. Let's say Pikachu makes $60 million opening weekend and Infinity War manages to hold on the top spot. Well, then at most, Infinity War will have 4 weeks at number 1 because on the 5th weekend, Aladdin opens. And by that 5th weekend, guys, Infinity War or Endgame is going to be down to making about, I don't know, 30 million that weekend on its 5th weekend, 30, 35. Aladdin is certainly going to eclipse that. So I believe it's going to be 2 weeks at number 1, but at the very most, it's going to be 4. So that's kind of how I see it. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I love that math. I mean, you can't argue with that.
It's good math.
I mean, then again, the one thing about the math is that these numbers could get blown out. Like what happens if Endgame comes in and debuts at $325 million? Well, now it throws that a little bit into doubt, right? So a lot will have to do what the final number is there. But I feel I'm going to say 2 weekends, but at most 4. I can't see it being number 1 the weekend that Aladdin opens.
No,
it can't, right?
No, well, because what you did was you mathematically broke down pretty much what I was saying, was that if it beats out Detective Pikachu, that it's for sure going to be 4 weeks because there's a 2-week gap between Detective Pikachu and Aladdin. But by the time you get to Aladdin, there's no way. I can't imagine Endgame will be above in that opening compared to Aladdin.
Yeah, and also I think that one of the things that Greg had responded to and that I was talking about is the fact that this movie has this drama component. And even critics that I've been reading for a long time that are absolutely curmudgeonly, like Jeff Wells, responded to this movie, and he doesn't like comic book films at all. Mm-hmm. I think this movie might perform differently than previous Avengers movies, at least previous to Infinity War, because it does have so much drama in the front of the film. And I think people, especially people who poo-poo comic book movies or are going to take their kids or whatever, might be surprised. So it could drive the box office longer than we've seen in previous comic book movies, especially previous Avengers films, because there is so much human drama and pathos, which is something that's new to this genre.
All right. Well, guys, what's that, Greg?
Do you think it deters, though, from families going to go watch this movie? Because I could still see families going to check out Infinity War a couple of times, but I mean, I don't want to spoil anything. It's just like I said, there's so much more dramatic.
No,
Yeah,
that's a
but
good point.
Yeah.
I agree, but I believe that's canceled out. Like, I think the math maybe then still holds because I think a lot of families went to Infinity War, and even with the ending that it had, I think a lot of families went over to Infinity War. So I think that might cancel this out, but it's going to be interesting to see. I just can't see any way possible. Like, Aladdin minimum is going to make 70 million opening weekend. And I just don't see any mathematical possibility that Endgame is still making 70 million on its fifth weekend. Like, that would be just unheard of. So I just can't see that happening. But do either of you guys think there's any chance that it beats Aladdin on Aladdin's opening weekend on its fifth weekend?
No.
Slim, very slim.
okay.
Yeah.